When I showed you the ancient Ethiopian text, don't say Yahweh, but Egziabeher, it sparked an absolute wildfire in the comments. Some insisted the Ethiopian manuscript secretly preserved the divine name underneath the translation. Others argued modern Bible translations intentionally replace, conceal it altogether, or corruption. But both sides seem to be missing something. And that's that ancient Semitic cultures didn't think about divine identity the way modern Western readers do today. In the biblical world, Hashem, the word for Hebrew name, wasn't a mere phonetic label. It represented identity, authority, reputation, character, and function. And once you approach the Ge'ez manuscripts, that tradition through this lens, the way the scribes handled divine identity starts looking very different than what you thought it would look like. So today, we're bypassing the modern opinions, the denominational noise, and going directly into the ancient Ge'ez manuscripts itself to examine the evidence firsthand. For those of you who are new to the channel, my name is G.C. Lewis. I'm the author of The Name Above All Names, and I'm a biblical expositor who spent more than 2 decades studying biblical texts, manuscript traditions, translation history, and ancient linguistic structures. My focus isn't on internet theology or denominational talking points. I'm interested in historical texts, manuscript variants, linguistic development, and the way different textual traditions chose to preserve meaning within those texts. My goal is to take you beyond the modern assumptions and place you directly in front of the manuscript evidence itself. If you value careful textual investigation and historical analysis, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into the truth of the text, starting with the high stakes set in Exodus chapter 3, before we do anything else. Moses is standing before the burning bush. He asks the $100 zillion question. When I go to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? This very question becomes one of the most important moments in the entire Bible, because God answers Ehye, Asher, Ehye, often translated as I am that I am. And for many modern readers, this verse is the ultimate proof that divine identity is all about pronouncing a specific literal name. And honestly, if there was ever a moment in history where an ancient translator would feel forced the pressure to spell God's Hebrew name letter by letter, Exodus 3:14 would be the exact spot. So let's look at what the Ge'ez tradition actually says using these scans from the Cambridge University Digital Library. These scans are of the Ge'ez book of Exodus. Because believe it or not, the text doesn't panic. It doesn't suddenly scramble to phonetically mimic Hebrew vowels just to manufacture a proper noun. In fact, forget about the vowels. The text doesn't even attempt to mimic the Hebrew consonants themselves at all. These scribes had the phonetic tools to approximate the yod, the hey, the vav, and the hey, but they completely bypassed them. Instead, the Ge'ez rendering steps into this high-stakes moment with a line of text that carries an unbelievable amount of weight. Za-hallo, wa-yəhēllu. This is a beautiful, heavy aspectual translation. Za-hallo uses the perfective form meaning he who exists or he who was, while wa-yəhēllu utilizes the imperfective form meaning and he who will remain or will be. It completely bypasses modern labels and stresses absolute timeless eternity. So let's slow down and really break down wa-yəhēllu. Za is the reflective pronoun meaning who, which, or the one who. Yəhēllu is a stative verb meaning to exist, to be present, or to be. When you combine them, wa-yəhēllu literally translates to the one who exists or he who is. It's expressing a continuous being, a terrifying, self-sustaining reality. It matches exactly what the Hebrew root hayah does when it's declared in Egzi, I exist. It's the exact same weight we find in the Septuagint when it translates this phrase as ego eimi ho'on, meaning I am the being or I am the one who is. But that's not the part that immediately caught my attention. What caught my attention is when the text identifies exactly who is sending Moses to face down an empire. The Ge'ez Manuscript anchors the divine identity right back to Egziabeher. And that's where I had to stop and stare at the manuscript for a moment. Because this isn't a careless scribal accident. Think about the sheer emotional weight of decision that had to be made on this parchment. Moses is begging for a name that will validate his authority before an enslaved people who are demanding proof. Yet instead of centering the entire historical turning point around preserving a sequence of sounds or a specific name, the Ge'ez tradition is consumed with preserving divine identity itself. The scribes don't care about reconstructing Hebrew pronunciations or matching Hebrew consonants for the readers. They care about communicating the sovereign reality, the raw authority, and the uncompromised identity of the one being revealed. And once you understand the ancient Semitic idea found in the Hebrew term Shem, the reason they did that starts making so much more sense. Because in the biblical world, identity was never about pronunciation. It was about nature, authority, character, function, presence. That distinction matters. And that's exactly where many modern discussions begin oversimplifying this. We often approach the text assuming the primary objective of every translation tradition was phonetic preservation. But the Ge'ez manuscript, this tradition is operating with an entirely different priority altogether. And if you still want to argue or think that Exodus 3 can somehow be explained away, then Exodus chapter 6 becomes even more difficult to ignore. Because Exodus chapter 6, verse 3 creates a direct textual contrast. In many of our modern Western translations, the verse reads something to the effect of, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, God Almighty, but by my name, Jehovah, Yahweh, or yours might say Yahuwah, I was not known to them. Now, think carefully about the structure of that statement. The entire force of the verse depends upon a distinction between a title and a name. The passage is structured around contrast. So naturally, if the Ge'ez scribes were operating with the same priorities many modern readers assume, this would be the exact place where we'd expect a strict phonetic transliteration. We'd expect it to appear and to answer the question that everyone keeps asking me, what is his name? But when you actually look at the Ge'ez manuscript tradition, something very different happens. The text doesn't insert a phonetic equivalent of the Hebrew yod-heh, wa-heh, yod-heh, vav-heh. Instead, the manuscript uses the term Egzi. Not even the full compound form Egziabeher, Lord of the universe, just Egzi. And this is where the manuscript becomes incredibly fascinating to me, because Egzi fundamentally carries the meaning of Lord or Master. So under a strict textual lens, it effectively reads along the lines of, by my name, Lord, Egzi, was I not known to them? Now, whether you agree with the theological implications or not, you can't pretend the manuscript evidence isn't here. The scribes clearly knew the structure of the Hebrew source tradition that they were working with. These weren't ignorant copyists casually inserting random terminology. The Ge'ez tradition made a very deliberate translational and theological choice regarding how divine identity would be represented within their text. And that forces some important questions. Were they less concerned with phonetic reconstruction and more concerned with preserving divine function and sovereignty? Were they intentionally prioritizing theological reverence over phonetic approximation? Was the concept of divine identity operating differently within the Ethiopian Christian textual tradition than how it later operates in certain Western frameworks? These are the kinds of questions serious manuscript study forces us to ask. And this is why so many people after the last video started asking me where they could find an authentic Ethiopian Bible or manuscript. Because once you begin seeing how differently the Ge'ez manuscript tradition handles divine identity, you immediately realize this textual world is far more complex than the simplified versions most of us have inherited. But the deeper I investigate commercial English editions, the more I realize many people don't even know what they're actually buying. That realization is one of the reasons I created the Beginner's Blueprint to reading Ge'ez manuscripts for the gclmedia community. And hear me, I'm not some elite Ge'ez authority. What I'm sharing with you is what I'm learning, observing, the patterns I've documented, and sharing the structures I've personally discovered along the way. If I can begin recognizing these manuscript systems and not feel intimidated by the page, you can too. Inside this guide, I'll walk you through the exact visual systems, structural patterns, reoccurring symbols, manuscript architecture, and methods that help me personally stop seeing the Ge'ez text as an impossible wall of symbols. I break down Iesus, Jesus, and Egziabeher, Lord of the universe, step by step, to explain the foundational logic behind the Ge'ez Abugida system. I show how reoccurring structures work visually and help you begin recognizing manuscript patterns for yourself. And I also make it very clear in this guide that this is a living document. As I continue studying manuscripts and learning more, I plan to continue to update this guide and sharing those discoveries with you, because I genuinely believe you are far more capable of engaging manuscript traditions than you've been led to believe. You don't need institutional permission to start observing these patterns. You don't need to become a professional philologist overnight. You simply need patience, humility, curiosity, and the willingness to slow down and look carefully. So, if you're ready to begin exploring these manuscripts for yourself, head over to my website at gclmedia.org and start using the Beginner's Blueprint to reading Ge'ez manuscripts. Because for centuries, these manuscripts sat isolated in monasteries while the modern world argued over translations far removed from the parchment itself. But the ink is still there. The scribes are still speaking. And if you're willing to slow down long enough to observe carefully, the manuscripts still have something to teach us. If you enjoyed this exposition, make sure you hype this video up. And let me know your thoughts on Exodus chapter 6, verse 3, where the Ge'ez Bible translation renders God saying, by my name, Egzi, Lord. They did not know me. Let me know in the comments. Because believe it or not, we're just scratching the surface. And I'll see you in the next video.